My name's Terry Greene. I'm working on pianos for a living. Been doing it for 44 years, believe it or not. I started working on this piano probably in the early 80s when Mr. Sloan wasn't really involved with the museum at that point. But he had access to the building all the time. Anytime he wanted to go there, and I seem to recall him saying he used to stay there once in a while, even though he lived right down the street on Studley Avenue. Anyway, he would notice how deteriorated the piano was getting and start fussing at the director there. And so once a year or so, I would come in and just try to do what I could to make the piano playable. But they weren't using the piano at all back then. It was just a piece of furniture, essentially. So it's been, what, about 40 years now that I've been working on this piano. I have a long association with the instrument. The piano was not being used, and when the fire came up, it basically cooked the piano. It was not exposed to any flames, fortunately, but when the fire people came in, the hoses were going, and the extreme humidity that created, sustained extreme humidity, caused a lot of veneers and a lot of case damage to the instrument, and helped to accelerate the deterioration of things like the soundboard and the pin block and all the other associated parts of the piano. So we brought the piano into my shop, and they wanted me to repair all the damage to the case, which I did, and re-glue all the veneers, which I did, and make the piano at least playable, which involved having to pull the plate out of the piano and replace the pin block, which is this piece of wood right here. The reason for that is the pin block had deteriorated so badly it would not grip the tuning pins any longer. So they allowed me to replace this, which means that I had to replace the strings and the tuning pins. You couldn't use the old strings, obviously. They were rusted up, and you can't put tension on an old string and expect it to hold the tension level. So they allowed me to remove the strings, put a new pin block in, put the plate back in the piano, but not change anything. Just make the piano play using the existing old parts. Although I got the piano playing, and it was mediocre at best, though. So you couldn't really expect an artist to play the piano with any kind of real facility. But I got it playing and using all the old parts that were there, even though a lot of the old parts were not original to the piano. They have been replaced at some period of time, probably back in the 30s is my estimate. The piano was built in 1914, so it had been used and abused by the party animal Sloans. And, and anyway, I was able to make it so it played using the existing parts. The old parts are just beyond repair. There's no more use for them. They're gone. All the moving parts in a piano, of which in the action of a piano there's about 9,000 parts. And all those parts have to work perfectly. And it's not going to happen anymore with the old parts. So that's why what we're doing here is we're renewing the instrument without affecting as little as possible the history of the instrument. Well, the first thing I had to do was dismantle the piano and put the piano on a dolly. You can see the dolly. I made this dolly specifically for this piano. So the way it's sitting right now, when I get to the certain point I can roll the front leg assembly back underneath here because the leg assembly in the front is tied to the pedal lyre. So the only way to play the piano is to get it up enough so I can slide the legs and the pedal lyre up underneath it to make it play. So anyway, I built the pedal lyre. So when Joe Hogan brought the piano here, we set it on the dolly here that I made for it. So I've done it before. And anyway, it's mounted on these jacks, so I can jack the piano up. You can see these little bottle jacks. So I can jack the piano up higher, lower, wherever I want to set it. And I can roll the piano around easily in the shop here. So I can bring it underneath. A chain hoist is what you use to pull the casting out of the piano. Because the casting of the piano probably weighs 300 to 400 pounds. So you have to chain hoist that out. And that opens up the piano to complete view. And then I take all the parts of the piano out, put them in boxes, label them, all the screws, every single screw, every single hinge of this piano will be preserved, lacquered, and put back in the piano. The only thing I don't use that's of the original are the tuning pins and the strings. Every screw that came out of the piano will be back in the instrument. So that preserves the history of the piano to a certain extent. I've replaced and repaired the soundboard, put shims in all the multitudinous cracks that were in the board, glued it all back down, preserved the old stencil as best as possible, carefully removing the finish around it, and then sanding the board down around it and putting a new lacquer finish on the piano. And this finish will last for generations if it's taken care of. What I also have done here is re-notched the bridges by pulling the bridge pins out and then re-notching these bridges so that the string termination points are as clean as possible, so that the piano has the best chance of sounding wonderful again. And I think it's going to sound pretty nice. You can always tell when you beat on a soundboard how much life there is in it. And if it has a bass drum kind of sound, you got something good left. So I was really worried. I didn't know that it was going to come back. But honestly, I thought it was just at the edge of being too far gone. Well, the soundboard was so badly fractured, specifically this one right here, which goes the length of the soundboard, that you could see daylight through the soundboard. I like to say when a piano gets to the point that you can read a book through it, that's, it's in bad shape. Well, what I did was I purposely dried the soundboard way down to almost nothing humidity to pull all the moisture out of the wood and allow all those cracks to open up as much as they could. And then I pull all the wood back down to the ribs. Underneath the soundboard are these perpendicular ribs that go underneath. And that's what provides all the strength of the soundboard. The soundboard itself is nothing more than a diaphragm, just like a speaker is in a stereo. But the ribs underneath are what give it the strength. And it was so badly separated, if you tried to play the piano, it would buzz. It would make all these weird noises because the soundboard is just vibrating on top of the ribs. Well, I was able to pull the soundboard back down to the ribs with glue, and then I opened these cracks up even more and inserted these old shims, which is made out of old spruce, 100-year-old spruce, and then allow the moisture content to come back up and sanded it all out and then put new finish on it. And I think it's going to be fine. I really do. I think it's going to sound pretty good. I'm really excited about it. And for a while there, I don't think it's going to work. And the people at Steinway would never have tried to repair this. They wouldn't. They would say, we're just going to have to pull the soundboard out and put a new one in, which would affect the history of the piano, maybe to the point where it wouldn't be the same piano anymore. This is as close to what the sound of the piano would be like from the very get-go, because I'm using the same old soundboard. That's so at this point, what I'm doing with the piano, I've got it stripped. The soundboard is all back together again. It's been re-lacquered. It's all sealed up. Now, what I'm doing is, you can see the new bridge pins I'm putting in. Bridge pins on a piano are nothing more than essentially nails, and they go in these little holes here. They have to be hammered in, and then um, the tops have to be filed so that there's the same height. That's the way Steinway does it. It doesn't do anything, doesn't change anything. It just looks the way that Steinway does it. So that's what I'll do here. And once I put all the bridge pins in, the next step will be to make a new pin block. This is the pin block that I replaced back when the fire happened. I'll have to make a new pin block. You can't use an old pin block. Once the tuning pins are in there, it reams out the holes, essentially. And when you pull the tuning pins back out, it reams out the holes again. So this will have to be made new again. The pin block is made out of several layers of hard maple, butcher block maple, basically. And so once I get the pin block done and the rest of the case is all done, then it will be on to addressing the plate. The plate will be stripped and re-gilded. The same kind of material that they use in the factory. It's a bronze powder mixed with lacquer, so it looks gold again. And it doesn't change anything. It doesn't make the piano sound better. It doesn't do anything. It's cosmetic entirely. But it does do one thing, and that is preserve the metal. And you don't want any more rust. So that's one of the reasons why we re-bronze the plate. It seals it up again and makes it so it'll last another 100 years or so. So that's where we're going to be at. Well, this instrument I have a great deal of nostalgia for this piano, because it was because of E.K. Sloan and his donating pianos to the various universities and schools and churches and other venues like the Virginia Symphony, the Virginia Opera. It was because of his desire to send out pianos to all these venues that they needed somebody with some technical expertise. And so the Steinway dealer at the time was the old Temple of Music, hired me because of E.K. Sloan, essentially. And they sent me up to New York to train in the factory. And so now that did not make me an expert. It just gave me a base of understanding. But what would happen is every time Steinway, EK would donate a Steinway to a venue or a school or something, I would go up with the selection committee and help select the piano. And most of the time I wasn't doing anything other than just being there. So I would hang out in the back where the workers would be and pull information from them wherever I could, specifically the voicing department, because the voicing of a piano is the heart and soul of the instrument. All of the other aspects of a piano are mechanical and engineering in aspects, but the aesthetics of the sound are what separate a good piano from a great piano. So anyway, because of this piano, and I think in many ways this piano gave EK the idea of donating Steinways to the local institutions, because he had a history with his parents buying a Steinway. And so I think that played a huge part in his desire to endow all these institutions and schools and churches with Steinway pianos.